All right, welcome back. The Law of Affinity. A few years back, a film came out called The Secret, which is something that actually has not been a secret, but it's basically like attracts like. In other words, you are what you think. In the words of James Allen, mind is the master power that molds and makes, and man is mind. And evermore he takes, the tool of thought and shaping what he wills, brings forth 1,000 joys, 1,000 ills. He thinks in secret and it comes to pass. Environment is but his looking glass. What we're going to talk about now is the relationship of the inner plane to the outer plane. This is what metaphysics is based upon, and it is what the theory of how astrology works is based upon. The inner plane is referred to in metaphysics as the astral. What does that mean?
Story.
Of a star. The word astra or astral means of the stars. So the astral plane, the ancients believed was subject to astral influences, to stellar influences. The outer plane is the physical, and most all of us here are very aware of that realm. You can come here. The older we get, quite often the more familiar we are with that plane, as gravity takes over, one of the laws. There is a boundary line that separates these two realms, which is referred to as the etheric boundary line, and it moves at a, this I believe is incorrect, 186,172 miles per second, give or take 10 miles here. It's faster than most of us can measure, but it is the speed of light. And that separates the physical from the non-physical, basically. Our soul, or subconscious or unconscious mind, these are different terms we can use to describe this, functions on the inner plane. Our physical form or body occupies the physical plane. They are connected to one another in that this inner plane moves at a frequency above the physical, yet it interpenetrates and it has a molding effect over the physical. The outer plane is the denser, slow-moving substance, and it vibrates at a frequency below the speed of light. Events which are attracted to the outer or physical plane happen first on the inner plane. This is how progressions function in a chart. How an astrologer is able to move the planets forward in a chart and make predictions about, what and when events will happen. So, depending on how those cells within our soul are conditioned, and these are what we call stellar cells, which is reflected in your birth chart, it functions as the law of attraction. We know as astrologers, when we study our chart, we can see how we think and feel relative to certain areas of our life. And what that does is it attracts events of a corresponding nature. So the chart maps our states of consciousness and determines whether we attract wealth, health, companionship, or whether we have the absence of wealth, injury, the opposite of health, disease, or solitude, aloneness. These are all things that one can discover in the astral map of their unconscious mind, their charter of birth. The way this works, and I want you to think about your physical body. All of our organs function together to bring us life and maintain health, but they also function separately. And about the only one that I have conscious control over is my breathing. There are certain yogis that can raise and lower their heart rates and blood pressure, and we all do that, some to greater or lesser degree, but usually not consciously. You can think about things which will certainly raise or lower your blood pressure. My liver functions quite well on its own without the interference of my mind. My stomach goes through the process of digestion very well without my having to think about it. My organs of elimination, well, they do, involve thought, because one usually has to get somewhere with that. Nevertheless, the comparison I'm drawing is that each of the planets in your chart functions as an organ. And of course, in medical astrology, we actually assign them to organs. The liver to Jupiter, the spleen to Saturn, the brain to Mercury, the stomach to the moon, or the breast to the moon, the heart to the sun. So we actually assign a corresponding, remember, as above, so below. This is all of what Hermeticism is based on. So our thought cells, or thought organs, are represented by planets as they fall in signs and houses. And how those organs function determines their relative health or dis-ease. Well, harmonious thought cells have the advantage of attracting to us pleasurable experiences. Discordant thought cells have the advantage of attracting to us painful experiences. So everyone had a pleasurable experience.
Yes.
Eating that pie may have been one of them. And everyone's probably had a painful experience, and sitting on those chairs might be one of them.
I was going to say eating that pie was one of them.
Well, how many pieces did you have, Beck?
Just one.
Okay.
It can be both.
Yes. Tomorrow it might be the pain. All right. The planets, or metals as we're calling them in tonight's class since it's alchemy, they function alone in thought cells. So you have the thought cells related to power or self-esteem, towards nurturing and domesticity, towards intellect and communication, towards affection and conviviality, towards aggression and protection, so on and so forth. Now, what happens with planets? In a chart, they start to form relationships to one another. And these relationships we call aspects. Different branches of astrology have different geometric angles that they recognize as aspects. Hermetic astrology has a set of 10 aspects that it works with. So what we call, when the thought cells are no longer working alone, we call them thought cell compounds. And this means that they are starting to interact with one another and function to attract specific types of events or experiences. So, just as the body is comprised of protoplasm, forming cells and organs, the soul or unconscious mind is comprised of psychoplasm, forming thought cells or thought cell organs in our consciousness. Our thought cells operate in a fourth dimensional realm to impact our dominant trends of thinking and thus attract specific events and experiences. So what we do as alchemists and astrologers is we like to go in and identify a thought cause in a chart. Your clients will come to you because why? Generally, they have issues. And you're there to help them. And what you do is you identify what is the thought cause of this issue. As astrologers, we do it using the symbolic language of astrology. You know, this shorthand that we use for the planets and the signs informs us of what the energies are that are impacting someone from a fourth dimensional realm. We have other things that impact us in addition to astrology. There is what is called inheritance. Inheritance can be your DNA. It can be your family tree. For example, there is evidence that persons who have been abused oftentimes have a greater chance of being abusers in their life. This is an inheritance. We also inherit habits of thinking, feeling, and acting from our ancestors. And I saw a year or so ago on public television a marvelous program on how grandparents' DNA affects us. That it's oftentimes skipping a generation and showing up further down the line. And they were focusing in on grandparents who had lived through famine and what the resulting health problems are that show up 2 generations later. What I'm getting at here is astrology isn't everything. Sometimes as astrologers we try to get it to answer everything, but it doesn't. It's just one of the pieces that we use to draw our conclusions. There's also environment and conditioning. Your family, your culture, the community in which you were raised also adds conditioning energy to your life, which is in the form of either painful or pleasurable experiences. So, how you were raised, the type of education you had, the conditioning of the faith that you may have been raised in. The astrological chart. It is a map of our consciousness at the time of birth. This is what I like to refer to it as our spiritual DNA. So we know that in our physical DNA, it is encoded with certain patterns which do not always express, but they represent predispositions to what could be character traits, behaviors, and or health conditions. Well, the astrological chart is the same. It is our spiritual DNA, and it shows predispositions towards factors of character and types of events or experiences. We like to refer to this as the blueprint of your soul. The interesting thing is the operating manual is actually sent separately from the baby. And not every parent receives theirs. Some have the wisdom to order one.
Sometimes they can't read the language either.
Yeah, there is that disadvantage, but there are interpreters for these things. So basically, what the astrological chart shows is our major trends in thinking or consciousness. The metals are the thought cells. The aspects through which they combine are the compounds. And the relative harmony or discord of any one of those thought cells in your chart represents its ability to innately attract to you either painful or pleasurable experiences in life. Now, what happens in the course of our lives is from the time of our birth forward, the planets continue to move. and they form different relationships to one another. In Hermetic astrology, we use a somewhat complex system of majors, minors, and transits to give us information. We place the emphasis on the major progressions as having the bulk of power for predicting events. But basically, one way to think of progressed aspects in a chart, we describe them as temporary stellar areals. What's an aerial? That's an old word. An antenna. I still have an antenna on my house. My TV's hooked to an antenna, so you can imagine I only get a few channels, which is fine by me, because I actually don't want to devote much of my life to watching television. But that antenna picks up on the waves that are out there and filters them into my system. We refer to progressed aspects as astrological weather conditions. These are periods in your life where you can be subject to sunshine or storms, and we know that the planets involved, the type of aspect involved, the house positions involved determine what the weather will be. We use what are called astrodynes, and I want to give you a little education in this process. Those of you who were at the NCGR meeting a week ago got a little prelude to this. Astro means star, dyna means power. So when we're looking at astrodynes, what we are looking at is the star power, or more precisely, the astrological power in a chart. And there are books which you can study to find out exactly how this was determined. But to give you a brief explanation, we are looking at basically three things when we look at astrodynes. We're looking at power, and then we're looking at conditioning energy, how that power expresses, either through harmony or through discord.
What is what's the percentage?
That is, to me, the most useful of the information on the sheet is the percentage, which means how much of the total, which is always going to be what? 100%. The power will change from chart to chart. I've seen charts as low as 257 astrodynes and as high as 886 astrodynes. So but you have to think of them as self-contained units. This is you. This is the volume of energy you have to work with. Now, power in a chart, in traditional astrology, the way the power is determined is the sun and moon have additional power. In fact, in calculating our orbs, we give them slightly wider orbs of aspect. Planets in angular houses are like wide open doors where the volume of energy comes through. Succedent houses are like windows. You get the average amount of energy. Cadent houses are considered to be like solid walls. If you live in an apartment and your neighbor plays their music, you can still hear it through your wall. It just may be muffled. So it's not coming through with the volume of energy that an open door is. Then we have aspects. And we consider things like conjunctions and oppositions to be more powerful than semi-sextiles and sesqui squares. They have a greater volume of energy that they bring into a chart. Well, in astrodynes, there is a mathematical value added to each of these factors. Whether an aspect is applying or separating also influences the power value that is associated with it. It's complicated enough that I'm not going to describe it any further tonight, but there are things that, if you're interested in the process, it can be done. But it is a way to consistently measure energy in a chart. So the power is this is the total number of the astrodynes which are numerically determined through accumulative mathematics of assigning a value to each thing, such as whether it's a luminary, a planet, angular sexticated house, whether the aspects applying or separating, and whether it's a semi-sextile all the way through an opposition. All of that's taken into account. But again, the number that to me is interesting is what percentage of the whole does that take up? Because basically this will tell you where your dominant urges are. And in this chart, what would the dominant urges be? Domestic. It is the moon. And what would be the weakest expression? Power. So from this chart, what could we say about this person? Is this a power-hungry individual?
No.
Yet, I wouldn't be showing you this chart if it wasn't a powerful person. So what would, this is actually a chart of a male, what would he be known for with the moon dominant?
Politics.
Cooking. Public welfare.
Thank you. You're great. What a great class. This is somebody who was involved in politics. I'm not sure how much he cooked, but he had fascination with diet.
Oh, okay.
And public welfare. So this indicates to us what drives you. And the thing that's going to drive you is the most powerful urge in your chart. And that's indicated by the planet with the greatest percentage of power. Now, the other thing that we've already said. Looking at this again, I've already given you this information. We'll move right on. Now, let's talk about harmony and discord. The harmony and the discord, the power is basically the volume of energy and where the emphasis lies in an individual life. But what we're also concerned with as administering professionals is how that energy is conditioned. Because it's the conditioning that determines really why someone's coming to you. And those of you that work professionally know that most people come to you with their problems more than their joys. Why? It's working, don't fix it. If it's not working, then we want to do something about it. So, the way the conditioning is determined, the innate nature of the planet. We've already done earlier malefics, benefics. Mars, 1/2 discord, 1/4 discord, Saturn, 1/2 discord, Venus, 1/4 harmony, Jupiter, 1/2 harmony. These planets have innate conditioning energy. There's essential dignities, and I somehow have never memorized the table of essential dignities, but this goes back to Babylonian times, where the sun is at home in Leo. It's fall or detriment in Aquarius. It's fall. Home, fall. And then it's...
Exalted fall.
Right. Okay. Home, detriment. It's exalted in the sign of Aries, and its fall is in the sign of Libra. Its harmony is in Sagittarius, and its inharmony is in Gemini. Don't ask me to do that for the rest of the planets. But
What's that planet?
the sun. But you can find that in a table of essential dignities. And so what this means is that each planet, as it falls in a sign, has also a certain inherent harmony or discord that is added to it, just because of its placement. You all know that there are certain people's houses you go into that you feel good or you don't. And it's kind of like that. Each of the planets, can either get comfy in a particular sign, or being in that environment starts to irritate them somewhat. So that adds conditioning energy in a chart. The nature of aspects. I don't know what the A is at the end.
A typo.
Okay, that does. I wanted to give you something extra tonight. There you have it. You all get an A. All right. It may have been from the next word. Astrodynes are the best method for analyzing the conditioning energy in the chart. Because the other thing I left out from that is aspect. We work with 10 aspects. There are other aspects out there that some astrologers work with and then some don't work with others. But within this system, you have harmonious, discordant, and neutral aspects. And we'll sort of put them on a line here. Going from the neutral aspect, a conjunction is neutral. We work with the parallel aspect, which is measured by declination and not by zodiacal longitude. So whether a planet is north or south of the equator, and contraparallels when you have planets in the same degree, north and south. So parallels. And the inconjunct in our system is neutral, though in some forms it's considered a discordant aspect.
Christopher, that's barely seen.
Oh, sorry.
The inconjunct.
Or quincunx, it's sometimes called. It's the one that looks like the side of a picnic table. So those are neutral. Moving away from that in the degree of harmony, we may have semi-sextile, which is mildly harmonious. It's half of a sextile, 30 degrees. The sextile, which is strongly harmonious, and the trine, extremely harmonious. Going in the direction of discord, for some reason there's a little more, but perhaps we suffer more in life. In the form of discord, we have the semi-square, which is mildly discordant. We have the square, which is strongly discordant. Sesqui-square, which is a square and a half, mildly discordant. And the opposition, extremely discordant. So these add conditioning energy to the chart. That's added up in this process of determining astrodynes. So what you'll see on an astrodyne chart is not only the power for each of the planets, each of the houses, and each of the signs, but you'll also see how that is conditioned. And for those of you that attended Meg's class earlier, she mentioned how once she showed her chart to someone, and what did they say?
Oh!
Yeah, you know,
Yes.
yeah, good luck, and walked out of the room. Well, again, it's a bit hard to see here, but that's a minus 97.83 discordines. So this is what we would call a discordant chart. As alchemists, we don't approach astrology in the same way that beginning astrologers do. In the sense of, recoiling in fright from squares and oppositions and starting to coo and drool over sextiles and trines. The thing is, for many people, the building block of experiences actually comes through the pain in their life. It informs us, is what pain does. So, you will oftentimes find individuals who have done great accomplishments in the world have actually done so because they've been motivated by the discomfort in their life to do so. So what is pain? In an astrological chart, pain is discord. We can describe it as physical suffering or distress, a distressing sensation in a particular part of the body. I have several of those right now. Mental or emotional suffering or torment. I'm not having that at the moment, but give me a day or two. Pain informs the organism that it is not being successful in adapting to its environment. Pain is not a punishment from a deific force out there that, saw what you did last week and thinks you need a good whipping. Pain is merely a process of education in the natural world. It is not exclusive to human beings. Amoebas can have pain. Carrots can have pain. And it's all depending on whether that organism is experiencing success or failure in its environment. If you're a plankton and you're in a portion of the sea where the temperature changes and you're not getting the nutrients you need, you're suffering. And it can lead to your ultimate death. So pain merely informs us.
I was just gonna say, so the
And
opposite.
speak very loudly because your voice is hard to hear and I'll have to repeat you.
So the opposite is also true. Pleasure doesn't always mean that you're a good person.
No, but if perhaps no, it doesn't. And there are certain
It's not a reward.
Exactly.
exactly.
Just a good time.
Yeah. What is pleasure?
Adapting.
It's the state or feeling of being pleased, enjoyment or satisfaction derived from what is to one's liking. That's all it is. Gratification or delight. Many of you had great pleasure from eating cheesecake. But what pleasure also informs an organism is that it's being successful. When you get your trophy or award at the awards banquet, you leave glowing, feeling, I did a good job and somebody else noticed. That's a form of pleasure. The same thing when you meet someone and they want to ask you out, whether it's romantically or as a friendship. There's a form of pleasure in that. And really all it tells us is the organism, ding, you're being successful. The value of pain is it moves us into action. So this is really the discordant aspects in your chart, or your most discordant planet signs or houses, quite often can move you into action. If I had placed a tack on each of your chairs, and when you came here and sat down, what would you do almost immediately? You'd jump up. You'd move into action, because pain has motivated you. How many times have you heard somebody who's been through a crisis, say, this got me to change? And that's oftentimes what happens. One's health crisis is their wake-up call, quite often, to create the changes that they need to make in their life. So the chart we were looking at before with the dominant moon and the very weak sun, which all of you with so little information could adequately describe, was the chart of Mohandas Gandhi. Dominant moon in the 10th house. He worked for the masses, for the common people, for public and social welfare. The sun was tucked away in his 12th house. Do you think that's really what he wanted to do? His time in jail actually gave him time to focus in on reading scripture and meditation and starving himself to death. So you can see where the motivation comes from. This scrawny, bespectacled man in a diaper was able to overthrow the British Empire in India, basically. And actually teach all of us a lesson that has come down to us through some of the greatest teachers in nonviolence, such as Martin Luther King.
Christopher, his second dominant planet was Mars, wasn't
Right.
it? And they antidote one another.
And they antidote one another. And what is marvelous in this is that rather than going to violence early on in Gandhi's career, Mars, first house, Scorpio, he decided to go towards nurturing instead, to loving the person that was beating you with a stick and being passive or submissive while they did that. Well, in the eye of the world, with the big bad British government out there just beating helpless people, it swayed public opinion, and it brought about the independence of, millions of people in India.
He's got that Uranus up there really very prominent, and what he did was so radical and revolutionary
No one had
that
done
you
this
could have a
before.
revolution without violence.
Mm.
I mean, I thought that was a radical concept for the time, at least.
It's still a radical
Well,
concept.
true.
There aren't many out there practicing this radical thinking. So,
And Gandhi was a soldier early in his career, wasn't he, at some point?
not that I'm aware of.
Oh, I thought I saw. that
No, he was a barrister. He was a lawyer.
Oh.
What else can we learn?
Plus, he was, like you said, it was highly discordant.
But let's look for his discord. The chart is highly discordant. What? Pain motivated him. And for him, it was the pain. Well, look at the sun sign. Yeah. What really upset him?
Unfairness.
Unfairness, or what we call injustice. So that is something that hit to the core of this man's being and motivated him into action, even though we could tell he gained in political power, not because it's something he wanted. It was actually something I think that really pained him. But he saw it as a means to an end for public service. What's the greatest discord over here? The way we read harmony and discord is the larger the number with a minus in front of it, the greater the discord. The larger the number with no minus, the greater the harmony. What's his most discordant planet? Mars. Did he take a beating? Was he subjected to bullies? Yeah. But did he resort to violence? No, because it was tempered by this other urge. And if we look at it, look at the power of that square. 1 degree apart from being square in aspect. Do you think this man could have done something differently with this energy?
You bet.
Uh-huh. But this is an alchemical example of somebody who lives on to affect all of us by personal example. So, but what about Mars? Besides anger, what else do you struggle with in life?
The L word.
Lust or love?
Not love.
Okay. Yeah, you struggle with lust. And Gandhi, Gandhi did things in his day, which if he was in New Mexico in the present era, he'd be in jail right now. Because he was constantly testing himself to see if he was in control of his passions or dominated by them. And there were times in his life, if you ever read his autobiography, My Experiments with Truth, some of the things that might be shocking to us today are sleeping with your younger devotees in your ashram to see if by lying next to them in bed you were still aroused. These were some of his experiments with truth, which in his time, in his place, in his culture, wasn't frowned upon. But again,
His wife was sitting watching while this was going on.
you're right, she was. We can see that here, huh? Couldn't get aroused. So this man struggled with his passions and considered both anger and lust to be things that needed to be eradicated from the character. And do you know how he did that?
Diet.
Yeah. He constantly experimented with diet. Being Hindu, he was vegetarian. And then he reached a point in his life where he started to exclude milk products and liqueurs because he felt that they still contributed too much towards passion. So we all do things differently, and we all have different ideas about all of this, but this was somebody who constantly experimented on himself. So I'm doing this to give you an idea of how this works. And you can see in his chart where the dominance of the moon comes from. The moon receives aspects from everything in his chart, with the exception of Mercury and the exception of the midheaven. And the type of aspects are primarily powerful. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 squares, 2 trines, and then we have a sextile, which is powerful, and then we have a mild semi-square and a semi-sextile. But again, they all add and build up energy, and you can actually measure them, because the aspects, which we've already talked about this, they're conditioning energy, discord, neutrality. But in reading the Astrodyne report, which you all have for your own chart, or hopefully you do, this particular half of the chart are the aspects which are measured by zodiacal longitude. This portion are the parallel aspects measured by declination. One of his strongest aspects are parallels. That's not uncommon in a chart because we only allow 1 degree orb for parallel aspects. The parallel is much like the conjunction in terms of the volume of energy it brings into the chart, but it is so non-specific in terms of how it expresses that we view it as intensity. I always compare parallel aspects to being the sort of the volume control on your stereo. It's basically how loud can you get it. Now, when we go to interpret these aspects using astrodynes, the upper line here, very hard for you to see, is the amount of power that the aspect has. Well, this is a conjunction. Mars and Venus in the first house, very close. If we were to, I don't have the chart right here to go back to, but I think they're within 1 degree orb. That's a powerful conjunction. And then it also shows here the nature of the conjunction. Well, here we have 0, 0, 0 conditioning energy. Why?
Mars and Venus canceled each other
They do.
out.
Venus has 1/4 harmony, Mars has 1/4 discord. They neutralize one another in that aspect. However, you can look for other aspects. This aspect, Neptune trine the moon. We see it has both power and harmony. The power, 10.47, again, is going to be, I believe they're in angular houses in the chart, which adds to the power. The closeness of the aspect. And the harmony is purely derived from the nature of the aspect. Why? The moon is neutral, no conditioning energy. Neptune is neutral, it has no conditioning energy. But because of the trine aspect, it has a lot of harmony. One of the things that is useful to all of us is to find our most powerful aspect in our chart. To find our most harmonious aspect, and to find our most discordant aspect. Your most powerful aspect is going to function in your life as what I call a life theme. This is something that you may work it out in your daily waking state. It may be a theme you dream about. It's an experience that comes up always repeatedly in your life. Your most discordant aspect is going to be a life theme. What will be most memorable about this theme? It hurts. The most discordant aspect in your chart is going to show an area of your life where you're continuing to have some type of suffering or sorrow unless you go into that process of conversion or antidote. And the most harmonious aspect in your chart is what I say you have to work. Because harmonious aspects do bring things in with no effort. But if you actually grab onto that area of your life and start to emphasize it, you're pouring energy into it, and its power to attract pleasurable events increases. My eyesight's not that good, but I'm believing that this is his most discordant aspect, which is the Mars-Moon square. There isn't any other number. Oh no, this is it. Pluto-Mars opposition. Wow, that's discordant. Even more so than that by, about 38 points of an astrodyne.
Pluto's in the second.
Opposing Mars in the first. Can anyone describe that aspect for me? Pluto-Mars opposition. Could you be pushed around by bullies? Remember, Pluto wants conformity,
Or
toe the party line, fit in, and Mars is, I want to kick your ass. No ifs, and, or maybe buts. That's how that works. So this is probably somebody who either could have been a bully or may have been bullied. I've not figured out a way yet to determine from a chart which way energy flows, whether it's perpetrator or victim.
Well, if he has a dominant moon, he would tend more towards passivity, though, wouldn't he?
Well, if you invented nonviolence,
Yeah.
that'd be my guess.
repeat the comment.
Oh, yes. The mute woman in the class here said,
The one that talks the most.
wanted to know if with a dominant moon he might not express his passivity, and that would have been the case. You can't think of a more passive state than nonviolence when somebody's whomping on you with a club. But that takes incredible self-control, because what is the natural instinct of all animals?
Fight back.
Fight back, tooth and nail. That's why we have them. So,
But what you also have with that is passive aggressiveness. And he was the master of that,
Yeah.
using passivity as a weapon.
yes. And it worked.
Right.
And it worked for what? For the benefit of his entire society.
Right. I mean,
So-
to him it was a weapon.
Correct. I do not know of examples, anecdotally, of his using that in personal relationships. Possibly with his wife. Male-female relationships in Indian society are very different than what we as Americans expect. He had Jupiter-Pluto conjunct in the 7th house, and his wife followed him faithfully, even to the point of cleaning out latrines, which for a Brahmin-born Indian, or even someone from the merchant class, would be considered way beneath them. So, in a highly caste structured society. So, we can find the harmony and discord. Now let's find the most harmonious aspect in this chart, and I definitely apologize for the lack of clarity here.
The Neptune moon.
Yes. 10.47, Neptune Moon trine.
Is there 10.55 up there? Pluto, Venus,
That's power. It's a minus,
7-9, okay.
yeah. It's a Pluto-Venus opposition, so we know from the opposition. So let's go with this. It looks like the most powerful, 10.47. Neptune, Moon, Trine. Can anyone describe that to me? Would one be utopian or idealistic?
Nurturing visions.
Nurturing visions, spiritually minded, incredibly sensitive to all of life forms. This is the person that urged Indian society to abolish the caste system. And talk about another really radical idea. Allowing untouchables to live within the ashram with people from all other... it's very hard for us to understand caste systems in this country unless you were born African American or in a Hispanic family or in a Native American family where you've been basically suppressed by a dominant culture and been restricted from opportunities until the last, 40 years when the concept of equal opportunity may have come about. So in India, it's even more so because it is so stringently stratified. That in this culture, people from ethnic groups that have been suppressed have found ways to get out and make fortunes and be successful. Much harder in that culture. So, radically idealistic policies were created by this man. So, most discordant planet in this chart. Saturn, minus 20.78 discordites. It's important to discover your strongest planet. Your most dominant planet in a chart determines your temperament, your expression, your dominant urges. It's basically your hierarchy of needs, is how I look at it. Are your needs ranging from universal welfare to utopian to individualistic to safety to religious? What is the thing that functions most powerfully in your soul? That will be your strongest planet. Those of you who have your charts and feel comfortable sharing, my dominant planet is the moon. So nurturing is my key instinct. Jessica, what's your strongest planet?
Sun.
So power urges function through you. The need to be respected.
And creative.
Alan?
Mercury.
So communication, expression is important to you. Vicky? Religion impacts you. Ed?
Uranus.
Individuality.
Sun.
Power urges. Sandy?
Sun.
Power urges. And? Sun. And? Pluto. Universal welfare. And that's in your 11th house too, isn't it? Now, two of you have that, what is it, Pluto-Saturn conjunction in the 11th house?
Mm-hmm.
That's your responsibility with groups. Summer,
Oh, I am Mercury.
communication, well,
Dominant sun.
dominant sun,
Saturn.
Saturn, safety urges. Sun, Pluto, universal welfare, Paul,
Mercury.
Mercury,
Uranus.
or
Uranus.
Uranus, and Mercury. All right, interesting. There's a lot of dominant suns in this group. Well, for one, the sun has more power in a chart regardless, so there is a greater likelihood that the sun or moon will dominate. But nevertheless, there's something to learn from that. And the other thing to look for is what your greatest harmony is and what your greatest discord. What I'm going to do here, and I realize we've gone way over time-wise, and I'm sure some of you actually want to sleep tonight. Saturn is the dominant discord in this chart. it's in the 8th compartment here in Scorpio. What are some of the areas where this could bring in problems into this individual's life?
Sexual repression.
Sexual repressions, that could be one. Though we think of the 8th house more as being other people's money,
I was gonna say
death,
partners,
taxes.
He wouldn't have a lot.
Partners are going to rip him
No
off.
inheritance.
What's that?
His partners are going to rip him off.
Partners could rip you off. Death, taxes, inheritances, legacies, gifts, grants, loans, the spirit world. So, where would this person tend to have their most stressful issues?
Text them.
Yeah.
Well, your spirit guides are very precise, though, or theirs are.
So, what we do is we look at the metal of lead in order to describe the experiences. They can either bring in experiences of greed, selfishness, avarice, hoarding, fear, dread, self-centeredness, depression, melancholy, despair. Here are some pertinent terms: lack, deficiencies, hardship, poverty. The events, this is actually my chart. I'm using it as a model for all of you because we're going to take a little time to look at your own charts. But the events that this has attracted into my life are brushes with death. I've spent a lot of time with the dying. Should work at a hospice. Heavy responsibilities have come into my life through taking on power of attorney or having to execute estates. Feeling or burdened by indebtedness and or taxes. I actually carry no debt other than a mortgage because I don't believe in that feeling of being burdened. You know, if you don't have the money, you actually don't need to have it. And feeling that financial partnerships have not always been reciprocal is an experience that I've had. Another thing I've experienced is difficulties in getting paid for my services.
Other people's money.
Other people's money, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there's always something there. Now, the way this translates into ruminations, because we all ruminate. What's ruminating? Cows do it.
Chewing it.
Yeah, they
over
get
and
stuff
over
back
again.
up out of their stomach again and they start chewing it again. Do any of you ruminate? Yeah. We generally ruminate in the areas of our most discordant planets. So, the way this functions in my consciousness, and again, I'm doing this to model for you more than to talk about myself here, but I know my own processes better than anyone else's. And it works for me in there's not enough time to do what I want to do. That's one of the thoughts that frequently enters my consciousness. Another is I will find my mental patterns saying, I feel worn out. I always have to beg for what's owed me. You know, having to pursue whatever is owed me is always an interesting form of gymnastics. So, how does Saturn work? You can see it in these expressive thought cells, which is lack, deficiency, hardship, poverty. Am I proud of it? No, but it's a good example of how all of this works in our consciousness. So in alchemy, what we do is we start to train ourselves to think differently. What happens when you think differently?
Thanks, Jack.
Happiness.
Yeah, your neurochemicals start to shift, actually. Your brain is impacted when you think differently, and it can show up on scans. So one of the ways in alchemy that we recondition And the advantage we have as astrologers over other people in the New Thought movement is that we're actually able to, through using astrology, identify a thought cause and determine, in working with that, whether we are going to either convert the energy or whether we're going to antidote the energy. And we do that with using time out. All right, we're good to go. I'm going to get your attention back onto the class, and you can continue the conversation later. The mind cannot differentiate between facts and imagined facts. I want to use an example here. 12 years ago, when I was working, I used to spend a lot of time on my garden in the North Valley, and which now the inheritors of that property get to do. And in the months between March and October, I was spending about 3 hours a day working in the garden. And so there were times where at twilight, I'd be running out there to move the water or to close off one of the wells or do something else that you do in your little agricultural plot. And I swear to you, I stepped on a snake and I shot vertically into the air, probably 3 feet. I didn't know I was jet propelled, but
That was a garden snake.
what did I step on?
Garden hose.
A garden hose. However, my mind could not tell the difference in that moment between a garden hose and a snake, and it jet propelled me. So the mind is a powerful thing. It cannot differentiate between facts or imagined facts. So this is the great thing in alchemy and in the process of converting our thinking. We can actually use this to our benefit rather than inducing a heart attack. We can actually use it to start to stimulate things that we want. It's amazing because what do we have here? That's a steel girder. If I put that on the floor here and no one had cocktails tonight, they could probably walk on it.
Oh my God.
I cannot bear to look at this picture. You know?
I know that poster.
That makes me.
Yeah, it makes me queasy to look at that.
Well, obviously.
I don't believe it's real.
That's one way to go with it.
That's how I go through life. There actually is no difference in it placed 100 feet above the ground unless there's a gale storm wind. That could certainly be a difference. So the thing is becoming aware of how the mind works and getting it to work for us. We have this incredible tool which really informs us as to what drives us, where we have the potential to have our greatest luck, and where we're going to have repeat themes in our life that we have to continually work on or convert. Gandhi's second most discordant aspect was that Moon-Mars square. And this is somebody who used alchemy. He decided to use that to transform it into something that was life-changing rather than, being a victim to bullies. I call it replacement therapy. So if you go back to the lack, the deficiencies, the worn out that I experienced, one of the mantras I work with continuously, knowing where my ruminations might tend to go, it's a matter of mental vigilance and catching myself. So rather than thinking about the fact that I'm tired, worn out, don't have any money, and I have more things to do than I have time in which to do it, I just run this little happy phrase through my mind continuously. It's like a tea bag that I'm just constantly immersing in my little cup of hot water, which is, I have plenty of time, plenty of energy, and plenty of money. And whenever I find my thoughts wanting to go to the contrary of that, I switch them back into that direction.
Do you find then that you do have time to do something that you wanted to do when you keep doing that? I mean, does it work is what I'm saying.
Yes, because I'm focused on what I have rather than what I don't have.
So you do find more time, more money, more energy.
I do more than most people do in a week. And in a greater variety of areas too. And people, people I know me from different lives. So people that I know in the art world know certain things about me, and they don't know this side of my world. People that I know in the metaphysical world don't know, my other teaching or things that I do. And so I actually do more than most people do. But I frequently feel like there's more that needs to be done. And that's just my own personal neuroses. So, what I want you to do, those that we've really run over, those of you that want to leave can do so. But what I'd like everyone to do is take a couple minutes and look at your personal astrodyne report under the section titled Planets. Find the largest minus number in the column marked Harmony. That shouldn't be too hard. Yes.
I see the ascendant and midheaven in there, but we're
Let's
not.
switch to a planet, because in Hermetic astrology we give those are the only house castes that we give the equivalent of the power of planets. And in our metaphysical system, we see it as the connecting wire between the soul and the physical body. The midheaven is our aspirations, our goals, what we're moving towards, and the ascendant line is the connection of that chart or that soul to the physical form. So what you do is you'd go to where you have a planet. Again, if your dominant power was a midheaven or ascendant, you'd also drop down to discover the urge. We didn't have that in this class. Identify the planet and the alchemical metal it rules. Does anyone want to volunteer?
To tell you that
Yeah, tell us your discordant planet and the metal that rules it.
Saturn and lead.
Saturn and lead. How uncommon is that?
What about Neptune and what's Neptune's one?
Copper.
Copper.
Neptune and copper. So, with a discordant Saturn, how would that impact you? Are there areas of lack or deficiency or burdening responsibilities or duties in your life?
And in that house too?
And the house position is?
6.
Okay, through your workplace and or dealing with health and those matters. And your Neptune, Samara, where is that?
Neptune is in the first house in Libra, the retrograde.
So that could be being self-delusional. That has its advantages. Or it could be things related to health, the physical body, the way in which others perceive you, because the first house is also how we project ourselves to the world.
Actually, perception of others of me has become very amplified.
Okay.
Negative perception, it just comes flying at me. Last probably 8 to 10 years, it's just...
Right, so that would be definitely something to work on, and we look to find antidotes to that. In the case of Saturn in the 6th house, what is the antidote to Saturn? It's copper.
And the sun.
And the sun. Why? Because Saturn is so negative that we need to add the sun for vitality. So it's finding an area of one's workplace where they can have a sense of self-esteem or control. Feeling like there's some, even if it's just the way your drawer is organized, that you have some control over that space of your workplace. And then it's bringing the element of beauty and conviviality into the workplace, which might be either decorating your workplace to where it has an aesthetic quality to it that brings you some pleasure, and or finding someone in the workplace, Venus, where you can establish a friendship, where there is that you identify someone in that workplace that whether you can have a crush on without taking it seriously. Not to be delusional, but it's like, I really like this person. I'm going to, be either friendly with them or be flirtatious, but in a safe, adult, non-destructive way. Because you know what? When you flirt with people, it makes them happy. Have any of you ever experienced that?
Yeah.
Someone bats their eyes at you or tells you how beautiful you are, or you know what? It makes you feel good. So you bring that Venus energy, but in a responsible way where you're not leading someone on or
Stalking them.
yeah. You don't want to stalk your coworkers, and you also don't want to get involved with your coworkers. That's also considered a unethical activity. But you can create a sense of mirthfulness, attraction, pleasure. With Neptune in the first house, one has to apply Saturn and the Sun. Why? Neptune and Saturn combined can become really negative. You add the imagination of Saturn to the the imagination of Neptune to the phobia of Saturn. And, well,
It's a toxic mix.
it's a toxic paranoid mix. So what one has to do with Neptune is get a reality check. Well, guess what? The people that hate you are not always necessarily going to tell you so. So you can't get it that way. But sometimes you can. If somebody treats you poorly or is rude or disrespectful, sometimes you can go up to certain people in your life and say, I need to check something out with you. Did I say something to offend you? Or, do I have horns growing out of my head? Or, what is it? Because sometimes others may actually inform you, or it might be, the danger with Neptune is it's like that snake in the garden hose. It's hard to know sometimes which is actually real, which is a fact, and which is an imagined fact. And that's where the Saturn comes in, is we go in and we start doing our fact-checking. Well, didn't quite come out right, but you know what I meant. And the other thing you do is you apply the Sun to that area, which is self-esteem. And, working with the concept that I'm a, magnetic, powerful woman.
So it's like the sun would be the filter in a way, or the ground on which this interaction can occur. Because that's got the substance, or it'll hold everything.
Right, and doing your fact-checking when you feel like you've been upset by someone, or let's say there's not always times where one can go in on an interview and then query them afterwards, but sometimes there are people that will say to you, well, the reason we chose the other candidate was this. Yes?
You got a volunteer here online. He says,
Does he have a name?
yeah.
Would you?
Orlando.
Hi, Orlando. Welcome. Hello to the UK.
He says the most discordant he has is Uranus at -10.55 in the third house, and the most harmonious is Mercury in the 12th house at 14.90, and dominant, ascendant, and harmony. But after that, Saturn on the first house is in disharmony at -6.
Well, Orlando, we're going to take just one of those factors tonight, because that's a whole lot. We'll talk about the rest at a later date. But if we were to take the one factor, the Uranus in the third house, as the greatest discord, tell me, class, what are some negative Uranus qualities?
Good looking at me.
Oh, well, I'll avert my glance.
So, too brilliant to get along in normal society.
Did you hear that, Orlando? Someone here said you're too brilliant to get along in normal society.
And therefore not appreciated.
And unappreciated. So,
but he's definitely an inventor.
So, yes, that's a very positive slant on this. Uranus in the third house can give some eccentric, unconventional ideas that may not be held by the common people around you, and might sometimes be alienating towards them, to neighbors, towards even relatives at times. So The antidote to Uranus, which is the upper octave of Mercury, is applying Jupiter. And knowing this man, I know that he is engaged in a spiritual life, so that's already operative. But the thing is to work with continually cultivating a benevolent attitude. And that would be applying Jupiter energies or alchemical 10 to the third house of the environment, which is one's chronic thinking. It's where we place our thoughts generally. And these would be thoughts that have to do with expansion, abundance, prosperity, goodwill towards others, and the attitude that goodwill will be met in turn from other people towards you.
One aspect of the discordant Uranus in the third house might be being up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
I've just been informed that one affliction of Uranus discordant in the third house could be, up studying at 4 a.m. So one must consider sleep. And with Jupiter applying it to Uranus, saying your prayers before you go to bed.
There you go.
And one of the ways to do those prayers that I like to do with applying Jupiter to my thought process is thinking down my list of gratitudes before going to sleep, of what's happened in the day that I'm appreciative of or grateful for.
What if the antidote in your chart, like the Jupiter and the Uranus, what if Jupiter is in opposition? Is that going to create a harder antidote?
We have a wildly intelligent woman in the classroom. and this could be a class of its own. Thanks for coming, Anne. Sorry to keep you up so late. The question is, what do you do if and I'm going to paraphrase this into my own language, if the natural antidotes are involved in a discordant mutual aspect? This is a challenge. And again, this is why astrologers have an advantage over other types of religious science or new thought practitioners, in that one can find the thought cause, and you may discover that trying to antidote it with something that's actually agitating the condition does not work. In that case, there are a couple things we can do, and I'm not prepared with examples tonight to show you on screen. But then you go back to the process of conversion rather than antidoting. And you focus in on the planet that is the painful experience in your life, and you just work continually at expressing only its positive traits. Other times, for example, in my chart, I have a opposition of the moon, which is my dominant planet, to the ascendant. And they're not antidotes to one another, but I have what's called a conciliatory factor in the chart. And that is the fact that my sun falls at an exact sextile to the moon and a trine to the ascendant. And I won't go into what all the complications are of having a dominant moon opposing one's ascendant brings about as a theme in their life. But the way I've worked with that is by cultivating the sun in my chart. And for me that comes through teaching, since it's in the 9th house, and through writing and through working with publications. And through stimulating, the sun in my chart is a very harmonious planet. So by doing that, it stimulates a lot of good feelings and increases my vitality. So you can find a conciliatory factor. Sometimes oppositions can be broken up by a sextile and a trine. Squares are sometimes broken up by a sextile and a semi-sextile. You may have a planet that falls between those two planets and forms 60 degrees of an aspect to one, which we know is a strong harmonious aspect, and a semi-sextile, a mild harmonious aspect to the other planet. So this is a little more advanced than I wanted to explore tonight, but by finding that conciliatory factor in the chart, you start to focus in on that. And because it's an aspect, it's in a thought cell compound with the other two planets, you work on funneling those energies through this third party, so to speak, and it breaks up the dissonance that might otherwise express. Did we cover everything that was on that screen? Yeah, so you've done that. Note the house position this occupies in your chart. Guess what? That is the area where you more than likely have your troubles. When you discover your most discordant planet and the house it falls in, it usually comes as no mystery to you. Why? You've got a theme going on there. So the thing to do at home, since I've taken you way over time, is to find that discordant planet, write down, as I showed you in my personal example, what are the negative traits associated with this. We use this as a self-reflective tool and for self-evaluation. Just write them down, be honest with yourself. You then write down what events or experiences has this attracted into my life. I listed mine for you. And what are some of the negative mental statements I run in my consciousness related to this area of my chart? I bared my soul to you in that area. You know, this is how it works for me, because I'm really familiar with my own thought processes. And then you go through the process of affirmation, which is creating a positive thought statement as an antidote or conversion to your most discordant planet. Use specific language. I've given you on your pages a lot of vocabulary tied in with the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus. So you want to pull the adjectives and adverbs out of those columns of vocabulary and start to create statements, either through converting the planet, that is your problem zone, or by finding its antidote and applying it to that area of your chart. And I don't know your name.
Michelle?
Michelle. You're the only person here I don't know. So, Michelle, for you, you might create something like, I, Michelle, find great pleasure in my ability to work and serve others. I always find friendly faces in my workplace. It might, at this point, defy reality, but we fake it till we make it. That's how this stuff works.
That's excellent advice.
You know, and when you start thinking about that jerk at the cubicle next to you that always is, you know, chatting on their cell phone or whatever, you quickly switch into the other train of thinking. And guess what? You have to do it for at least 3 months, because this has to be done with intensity, which means you really have to get your feelings behind it in order for it to work. It has to be done repetitively, which means more than one time. Every time you think a negative statement, you then need to do 3 of the positive statement that you've created, because you're tipping the scales is what you're trying to do. And then the other thing is, we've decided on intensity, repetition, and duration. In order for this to switch the energy within the consciousness represented by the thought cells in your chart, and to start attracting events of a positive nature rather than a negative nature, it has to be done repeatedly, with intensity, and with duration. And that's why I say, try it for at least 3 months. Don't expect immediate results, that you just keep slamming away at this, even if it flies in the face of reality, until it actually starts bringing about the desired result. Yes?
My understanding of affirmation, there are 2 things, and maybe you can comment on these things. One is not to put it into the future, to make it present.
Yes.
Immediate. And the other one is to don't express it in terms of a negative.
Exactly. This is very good advice. We're not saying the affirmation, I no longer have jerks in my workplace. Or that someday my prince will come. We're not putting it out in the future or using the negative. It's a positive thought statement that's repeatedly immersed. This is the tea bag in our conscious mind until it brings about a desired result. That's what it is. So we state it in completely positive terms, and it's, I, Christopher, now have plenty of energy, plenty of time, and plenty of money. You bring it right into the present moment. We're almost done here. Oh, we are done. This is, anyone that's interested, our next event is going to be this Wednesday evening. It's for the local ARE group, which is the Association for Research and Enlightenment, Edgar Casey's group. I'm doing a special presentation for them here on the history and background of the Tarot and its use in divination. I know it's a different topic than astrology and alchemy. Also, those of you who are interested, tomorrow morning, 11, we have a service here which will discuss the sign of Sagittarius, its relationship to upcoming holidays. And then we have a winter solstice and celebration on Sunday the 20th at 11 a.m. It's really a load of fun. It's both spiritual and social. And then I will be teaching a 10-week course starting this January 1st. And it's going to be the planets in Hermetic. What?
I thought you said 21st.
21st.
Oh, sorry.
I thought the two if I didn't say it, not the first. Each week we're going to look at one planet and discuss its urges, its expressions, its positive traits, its negative traits, looking at how it expresses when it falls in the different signs, using essential dignities, how it functions when it falls in a particular house of the chart, looking at aspects to that planet and how that influences an individual. We'll be doing a lot of hand-on work with our own charts in the class, because that, I think, is the most important work we can do. And then we'll be talking about, in the case of it, let's say it's the sun, conversions, but with the other planets, both conversions and antidotes. So, but that's a really long class. It is 10 weeks. One can come into any one of those classes, and you can probably figure out the order in which I'm going to teach them. So, any questions on this process? I apologize for keeping you all 50 minutes longer than we had planned. All right. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.